to talk, as you know, we're big into power data. It's how I coach a lot of my athletes. It's how I coach all my athletes. And then we'll talk about gravel power, but gravel power data files are complete opposite of like what the last 15 or 20 years of the sports science has developed from road racing power, data. These courses are so difficult, and it's just a true test of endurance, and there's no 5-minute crux moments. FTP it's good to know, but it's not the end all for gravel racing. It really these races are a tortoise and the hare type of situation, and you want the power data. Looking at it post race is very, very telling, and we'll talk about what it means for pacing. But during the event, I'm not really looking at my watts too much. Like, I guess everyone's so in tune with their watts, they'll know when they're going good and stuff. But when you talk about pacing, if you're doing an 8-hour race, you probably don't want to be doing threshold watts in the first hour. Yeah. That's a good rule of thumb. But if you are and you're feeling good and it's easy, then that's going to be some positive reinforcement that you're really, you're on a good day and your training's coming through. But that's kind of an aside. But yeah, power data is just unlike everything that has been developed in like WKO4 and, just over the years that we've become accustomed to. So yeah, we should just get into that.
Yeah, I think with pacing these gravel races, it's both an art and a science, and a lot of that, obviously comes from experience. But, like you said, it's very different from road racing where, in a road race, you're kind of riding in this pack and there's a lot of time to rest and recover. And then, you have to be able to just give it the beans for 5 minutes to get over the final climb or to make the break. And then it comes down to a sprint. That's typically not how these gravel races happen. And so it's a very different animal from most of the road racing that we're used to, for people that
we grew up with,
developed with. Yeah. And so maybe if you're, if you don't have road racing background, you're just, only doing gravel, it's different, but it's very tempting. And this is something that we see a lot and that I've experienced myself, and I'm sure Frank's experienced, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, that it's very tempting to from the gun, it's exciting. Everyone's together. It's the egos are getting stoked that to go out super hard,
to
overdo it. And, when in reality, a lot of these races are so long and there's not a lot of crux moments necessarily, where there would be in a road race, where that, it's really about, I like to kind of compare it to, ultra running and these kind of big ultra endurance races. Obviously, we're talking about things like Kansas, some of these longer gravel races, things like the Crusher don't necessarily apply to this. But where it's the people that do the best, the races are won by people that sort of slow down the least over the course of the race. And that comes down to these factors we're talking about: efficiency in terms of pacing, having a dialed, super well-planned nutrition and hydration plan, and having your equipment, dialed, because all those things increase your efficiency and allow you to just conserve as much energy, so that when you are riding and over the course of the day, it's not just suddenly you hit this wall and you just drop suddenly. It's you're, maybe you are slowing down because of inevitably during an 8-hour, 7-hour race, it's you're going down. But a lot of people have problems when that drop is sharp because they are dehydrated, or they're bonking, or they get a flat or something.
Yeah, these gravel races, getting into the course, they're so demanding. The course is going to take care of the tactics. And unlike a road race where there's opportunities to sit in the pack, draft, conserve your energy, in these gravel races, you can draft and you can kind of sit in, but this course is not going to pedal itself. And you generally, even when the pack is riding the fastest they can over the course. So it's completely different. Generally, athletes are going to be doing tempo to sweet spot watts at any one point of the course. a good friend of mine, Ben Delaney, did the Dirty Kanza, and I asked him what his intensity factor was for the race. That's his normalized power from start to finish, and I do believe it was 0.68, which for all you power astute students out there, they'll recognize that as kind of low zone 2. So, in the tortoise and the hare, of course, Ben started off wicked fast. He was in the front group. He did not maintain a line of sight, could not see what would otherwise been easily avoidable objects because he's drafting in the pack, and he flats.
Yeah.
And he does that after ripping it, super hard watts, and goes on to, limp in home at barely zone 2 the last 50 miles. So that's what we mean by the tortoise and the hare. And no one ever says in the post-race activity comments when they're giving me the play-by-play that they went out too easy.
Yeah.
No one.
Right.
And this, we've known this for years with Leadville 100, and the mountain bikers out there that do these, that are good at the 3-hour, 4-hour races. They're already, kind of in tune with not going out too hard. But I think for a lot of the road racers or Fondo riders that come into gravel, because you do start with 500 people all together, it's super fun, but it's really easy to let your ego get the best of you and go out and try to hang with as strong of a group as possible. And that you pay for that.
Right, because I mean, a lot of these races, there's a lot of time. I mean, these are races that take, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, and that's a lot of time to either fall apart and lose it all, or to sort of ease into it and kind of ride into it. And obviously, like the people that are at the pointy end of these races, the Ted Kings or the Josh Berrys of the world, not me. But like those kind of guys, like they can handle doing it because it's like their job, like they are used to doing that, so like Taylor Finney or these EF guys that are gonna be at Kanza, that's literally their job. That. Like they're going out there and they can handle like giving it the beans for 8 hours because that's, they're ready for that. But this, I think, a podcast and these kind of strategies apply to the 99%, the people that are actually, trying to have a good time and do well and feel good and feel happy about their result. And so it's very tempting and I mean, I've made this mistake many, many times in road races and in gravel races, that there's so much excitement happening, right at the beginning of the race. And, you end up, burning too many matches at the start, and someone asked about Rebecca's Private Idaho, talking about, the pacing for that and like the demands of that race. And, for those of you that haven't done it, it's like 100-mile race, gravel race. And in the first like 30 minutes of the race, there's like a 15 or 20 minute long climb. That's pretty hard, pretty steep. And it's all together. And so it's really tempting to just like go as hard as you can.
Yep.
And what happened to me this past year is like I was with the front group going up the climb basically at threshold, and inevitably later on in the race I blew up because it's just like you feel good in that moment because you're fresh, but then you pay for it later.
Right. So with the ego and the pacing and the power, a lot of it comes down to the course. If there's a selective part of the course in the first hour of the race, everyone can ride that at the threshold watts. You have to ask yourself, what do I gain by doing so? What do I not really gain? If you're doing this climb and you're already by yourself, just get into your pace.
Right.
That for the most part, that's going to be tempo and sweet spot. If you're in the front group or in a really good group, ask yourself, what is getting in this group gain me? So for a race like Rebecca's Private Idaho, you come over that climb, you're in a good group, that's your train, to pull you along to establish a gap from everyone that have made the selection behind you. Same way with the Almanzo 100 in Minnesota, 20-minute climb right off the bat, but there's the next 80 miles are flat. So you go wicked hard on that first 20 minutes, but then you get in a good group, and that's pretty much where you'll finish as long as you eat and drink and don't flat. So, but on other races like a crusher, like 1 hour long right off the get-go, what does making the front group get you? And Jackson's got a story about this. And for 90% of, I think most of the athletes that I've worked with, and I think that might be listening, you're already racing at your own pace. So at that point you want to settle in to like tempo and sweet spot watts. And so, but those are for races with climbing. There's plenty of races that aren't climbing. Like if anyone out there wants to share with us their intensity factor from the Dirty Kansas, go ahead and like post that in the comments, either live now or afterwards. I doubt many people are doing the Dirty Kansas greater than 0.8, which is like tempo watts.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at a file from the Bootlegger 100 right now, race in Western North Carolina this past Saturday. The athlete had an IF of 0.78, so that was really good, nicely paced, and his finishing time was 8 hours 9 minutes. And he 106 miles, 11,500 feet of climbing. And, wisely so on the first climb, he held back and, kept it tempo and sweet spot watts up the first two big climbs. And then after that, there was even a bigger climb, which you got to get up to the top of, an hour-long climb. So, again, back to the tortoise and the hare, and no one ever says I went out too easy. And in this race, and everyone since everyone's kind of relating gravel racing to themselves, everyone finishes crippled. Yeah. Like everyone's watts go down. And so really it's just like what Jackson's saying is like how less of your watts can you go down. And that just comes from doing long rides, in that we talk about in our gravel simulation.
Right, because again, in like a road race scenario, it's about conserving as much energy as possible for the last, hour of the race, where you can make the selection over the last climb, so that but still have some left in the tank to sprint. Right. Because, I mean, I think it's probably super rare to see many of these gravel races coming down to a sprint. I mean. Yeah. I think,
and even if so, it's between one other person.
Yeah, and it's like a sad-looking sprint because everyone's so gassed, And,
you've already decided the race. Yeah. You're just finishing up the details at that point.
Yeah, and so it's like you have to be able to measure that effort. You're gonna have a much better day if you conserve that energy over the course of the day, rather than just kind of like banking everything on the sprint, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it's a tough balance, but it comes from experience. And I think, again, like you said, that's where the gravel simulation rides come in to play for all of these factors. But with pacing, I think, like I talked about, I think in a couple podcasts ago, where sort of my biggest regret about going into the crusher was that in those gravel simulation rides, I wish that I had paced it a little bit differently, so I could have felt what it felt like to be at that limit, but still have an hour left in the race and a big climb left or something like that. Mm-hmm. Because it's very easy to feel super good on the first climb and then just kind of
everyone feels good on the first climb, and they feel so good that they go too hard, and then you pay for that 4 hours later, 5 hours later. Yeah. Thus the tortoise and the hare. And, when you do your simulation rides, that's when you can really nail your pacing. It's like, okay, I want to do tempo watts for the first hour. Even though I feel great, then you want to try to maybe do tempo watts in the 6th hour. Yeah. That would be like an incredible training ride, right? If you're able to do that. So gravel racing is not so much about threshold, max 20-minute power, things like that. It's really just the diesel.